Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. So I made my, hello Cassie, hello. I made my top 10 romances of 2020 video, and I had a comment that said, are you going to do your top historical romances of the year? And originally I didn't think that I was, because I feel like most of my top 10 romances were historical romances, but then the more I got thinking about it, the more I thought, you know, it would be really fun to have a list of maybe my top 20 that I've read in the year that weren't either on my top 10 list or the honorable mentions in that video. So that's what I did. I put together a list of the 20 of the best historical romances that I've read in 2020, although if you want my very best romances, they are in my favorite romances of 2020. So any romances I listed in that video are not going to be talked about today. So these are, some of them are 4-star reads and 5-star reads, but they all, I feel like, really were enjoyable to read, and some of them had really different fun elements to historical romance that I wanted to have just on a big recommendation list for the best of 2020. So with that long intro, let's go ahead and get started. One of the number one historical romances that I read in 2020 was Indigo by Beverly Jenkins. I read this book early on in the year and it stuck with me so freaking much, and I loved and adored it with my whole heart. I have such strong feelings about this book, and especially about the couple and their romance in here. This book is by Beverly Jenkins. This is Own Voices. If you are new to historical romance, definitely check out Beverly Jenkins. She writes some absolutely amazing American historicals focusing on the Black experience, and it's really a very unique point of view, and she also is so great at telling stories where they are just so completely in love with each other, and I love that so very much. So this book is about Hester, who is a freed slave. And she was working in, like, the indigo fields as a child, so her palms are stained indigo, which is where the book gets its name from. She's freed, and she is now sort of working for the Underground Railroad and trying to help other Black people be free. So she is tasked with caring for an injured man who is known as the Black Daniel. He is a very important player in the Underground Railroad and freeing a lot of the slaves at that time. He's a very powerful man. His name is Galen. That's how Hester knows him. And he had a life, so he was a freed black man, and he really lived this very luxurious, rich life before he decided to devote himself to the Underground Railroad. And watching him just completely fall for Hester and how he was just so after her and really trying to win her heart was just so enjoyable. And I especially loved the whole taking care of him scene in the beginning when she was injured. There's a bigger overarching plot that has, there's a traitor who's revealed and they're trying to free all these slaves, so it has a lot of other plot elements to it, but I just loved and rooted for their romance so much that it was fantastic. If you haven't tried Beverly Jenkins, I highly recommend that you start with this one because it's just such a powerful and moving and beautiful book. I loved it so freaking much. Okay, the next book that I want to talk about is actually my most recent historical romance that I read. This is a little bit longer than a novella. It's pretty short. It is, I read this on Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but it's part of a series. I believe it's the 4th one in this series. So the book is The Royal Conquest by Stacey Reed. This book was a complete delight. This was completely captivating from beginning to end. It was so unique and so interesting and just really super fun. This book follows Peyton, she's recently been, I guess, spurned by a lord who had said he was going to marry her. She thought they were in love, and then he rejected her, so her heart is kind of broken, and her parents really want her to marry a titled man, but she makes this promise that she's not going to marry a man with a title. She wants a common, average man. That's who she's going to marry. So one night, she ends up meeting Mikhail, I always get his name wrong, Konstantinovich at night in a horse stable. They have this really very delightful first meeting, and he is actually a horse breeder. He's a Russian horse breeder and a horse trainer, and they start to have this really sort of fiery, very complicated relationship. And Mikhail is interesting because he's never really allowed himself to be intimate with a woman, and he certainly has not felt the kind of feelings that he has for Peyton in a very long time. Like, he thought he was past being able to feel all that. He has a dark past with some trauma, and it really makes intimacy with a woman be very difficult for him. He has to do things in a certain way, and he's really not sure that that is suitable for a lady like Peyton. It was so good, you guys. Like, this was such a complete delight. It was spicy meatball. There was a lot of longing. There was a lot of different plot reveals, and so Peyton really has a lot of feelings for Mikhail, and she's excited about that because he is like a common man, but little does she know he's actually a Russian prince. So he has that secret he's keeping from her the whole time, and then the other secret that is sort of the biggest one, that is the struggle in them trying to be together. It was so good. I loved it so much. It was fantastic. As soon as I read this, I immediately went and bought the other ones on Kindle. Those are shorter novellas, and I can't wait to read them. Super big fan of Stacey Reid after this one. Okay, and the next book on my list is The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. This is part of her Bridgerton series, which is definitely getting a ton of buzz right now. This book was so freaking good. I honestly loved this book so much. So this book has Anthony, who is the oldest Bridgerton child, and he's definitely like the man of the house. He's the Viscount. He is taking over that role of his father. And the story opens, I feel like almost all of these stories open with kind of a sad, sort of dramatic prologue that kind of sets you up for what's going to happen in the rest of Julia Quinn's books in the book. And it opens with a scene with Anthony and his father where he is there when his dad dies, and so really a lot of this book has to do with how he overcomes that trauma and how difficult that is for him. And I felt like it was honestly just pretty much perfectly done. Because of how his father died and how young he was, Anthony has decided that he's not going to marry for love, because he's positive that he's going to die young and leave his wife and children behind, and he has seen how that has really hurt and affected his mother, and he doesn't want to leave his wife behind with her being in love with him. So he is going to do his duty and marry for duty so he can, pass the title down, but he's convinced it's not going to be a love match, and he's not going to fall in love, and he's just dead set against it. So he ends up picking a young woman of the season who he thinks will be a suitable match for him, and quickly thereafter, he has several run-ins with this young woman who he's picked, older sister named Kate. And Kate is a fantastic heroine. She's real fiery and just a ton of fun, and watching her sort of give back all of the, little barbs that Anthony would give to her was just so freaking delightful, and I really, really enjoyed this book. This one has been my favorite in the series so far, and I 100% loved it, and I would highly recommend this. And if you weren't a fan of The Duke and I would still highly recommend picking this up. It is enemies to lovers, lots and lots of fun Bridgerton family vibes in here. This is where you find out about the bees in Bridgerton, and it was so fun. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I have to recommend is Allscott and Bothered by Kerrigan Byrne. This is her newest release. This is book 2 in the Devil You Know series, I believe is what it's called. And this came out in September. This was our first book that we picked for the Rake Appreciation Society, which is a historical romance book club that I do with my good friend Jen. So you should join us if you love historical romance, because we have monthly live shows where we talk about the books we picked, and this was our first one, and it was a complete hit for me. This was a 5-star read. This is my favorite so far in the series, Devil You Know, and I believe there's only 2 out at the time. But I do have the arc for the second one I'm super excited about. Okay, so this book follows Cecilia, who is she also has, so another thing that I want to say, if you are new to historical romance, when Kerrigan Byrne definitely writes a little bit darker themes, so almost always the opening chapter or the prologue has a really dark scene that can definitely be triggering. So I would kind of go into her books expecting that, and if you need trigger warnings, be sure to check for them. Cecilia is a plus-size heroine, and she has a really traumatic childhood, and she ends up being rescued by this woman who comes to tell her that she actually has inherited this gambling hell, and Cecilia decides to take that up upon herself and grow up and learn how to run this gambling hell. And in the process of doing that, as she grows up, she ends up meeting Ramsay, who is the Lord Chief Justice, and it is his job to put a stop to this gambling hell and all of the vices and sins that go along with it. His first meeting with Cecilia is just one of my favorite first meetings I have ever read about. He just is completely smitten with her and struck with her and wants her so much. And I just loved it. I loved it. I loved their relationship. I definitely feel like Ramsay is an alpha mellow, which is like a big, tough, strong alpha guy who is completely soft and gone for the woman. So if you like that type of hero, you will probably enjoy this book because it was just fantastic. I just love the way that Kerrigan Byrne gets such depth of emotion in her books that go beyond just a surface level, and how she deals with some issues that are really important. I'm a huge fan of her books. This one was fantastic this year. Highly recommend it. Alright, the next book I have to recommend is One Good Earl Deserves a Lover by Sarah MacLean. Now, 2020 was the year that I discovered Sarah MacLean, and I just fell in love with all of her books, and it was really difficult for me to not put all of the ones of hers that I have read on this list, so I narrowed it down to my favorites. A lot of her favorites did make it, of course, onto my top romances of the year. This one almost did. It was so good, but it's like so hard to choose because they're all so good, but there were just a few that were just like hit me a little bit harder, although this one hit me super hard as well. I love this book so much. Okay, let's get into the plot. So this book is book 2 in her Rules of Scoundrels series. This is the second Rule of Scoundrels. This follows Pippa, who we meet in the first book, and she is engaged to be married. She is a young woman who is very intellectual, very much uses her mind, and approaches the world with really like a scientific lens and tries to find reason and logic for all things. And the one thing that she really wants before she gets married is to be ruined. She wants to learn about what happens in the marriage bed. And so she approaches Cross, who is one of the owners of the Fallen Angel, which is a gambling hell, who she met through her sister in the first book. Although I don't think that you necessarily have to read this in order, but they're so enjoyable I don't know why you wouldn't, but you could read this as a standalone too. So she ends up she goes to find Cross, who she believes has this reputation for being very skilled with women, and she propositions him to school her in that and offers that he be the one to ruin her. And they have this delightful push and pull the entire way through. I feel like Sarah MacLean deals with such wonderfully beautiful and really layered topics about women and relationships and how to be accepted, and it's just so, so great. And I loved how much Cross wanted Pippa. I loved it so much. I just completely adored this book. It was fantastic. Highly recommend this series. And the next book that I have to recommend is Mine Till Midnight by Lisa Kleypas. I love this book so much. This book is just so completely swoony. Like, if I had to describe this book, I would say it is knee-weakening swoony, because Cam Rohan, the hero in here, loves and wants Amelia so much, and I just am here for it. I loved it so much. So this is actually the first book in her Hathaway series. This book follows Amelia, who is, I believe she is the oldest. I'm not sure if she is the oldest child, or if, I think she actually is the oldest child, but her brother is the one who has the title in the estate because he was a man. So Amelia is the oldest sibling, and she is trying to take care of all of her brothers and sisters, and also to keep her brother out of trouble, as he is very quickly burning through the fortune that they had inherited and is really getting into a lot of trouble. Their parents have passed away, so she's really trying to keep this whole family together. And one night when she's out trying to find her brother, she meets Cam, who is a Romany man, is really a self-made man, and is very successful and very powerful, and he helps her to find her brother. But Cam is 100% instantly smitten with her, completely intrigued with her, against his better feelings. He thinks that, he doesn't know why he should be so attracted to her, but he just completely is. And he is always there trying to help her and as she's trying to pull this family together. He's just such a wonderful protector, and he just wants her so much, and the way that he feels about her, like, oh my gosh, like Lisa Kleypas writes some of the most swoony romantic reads, and this one was so great. I love this book. I haven't finished on in this series, but that is one of my goals for 2021 because it was fantastic. Highly recommend this. Okay, the next book I have to recommend is The Duke I Tempted by Scarlett Peckham. This book, you guys, oh, I loved this book so much. I'm a huge fan of Scarlett Peckham. You will see one of her other books in my top romances of the year. This book was just completely compelling and delicious and dark. This book definitely does deal with some darker issues. It has I don't want to reveal it. So it does deal with some darker issues. We follow the Duke of Westmead, who has finally gotten his household and his family lineage out of financial ruin, and it is now his job to find a wife to have an heir so that he can make sure and pass that on. He has a very dark secret that he is keeping from pretty much everyone that we do actually see that in the first chapter, and it comes into play with how he reacts and responds in his relationship with Poppy, who is the heroine. So Poppy is a very independent young woman, and she also is really striving to keep that independence. Like, she doesn't want to marry. She just wants to run her sort of like exotic nursery that she is building with a lot of exotic plants and things like that. But she's having a little bit of trouble getting the capital. So the Duke of Westmead finds her when he is trying to find someone to help decorate like their ballroom with plants and trees and all this stuff for a ball he is hosting to try and find a future wife. And so he hires her to do the decorating, and instantly they're very taken with each other. Like, Poppy is very intrigued with him because he's just such a different, sort of quietly brooding, but also really compelling type of character. And the Duke is really very interested in Poppy against, again, his better wishes. But the character dynamic between these two was just so interesting. And this one is also another really sort of slow building romance that really doesn't get to the final point of happiness until the very end. But watching them both really sort of struggle with their own individual issues, and also how that played out with them together, was just fantastic. I honestly cannot say enough good things about Scarlett Peckham. If you like a really darker type of book that really kind of goes to some places that you wouldn't expect a historical romance to, I would highly recommend this. I know that I have heard Scarlett Peckham talk before about how her books are melancholy, but ultimately joyful, and I feel like that, or maybe hopeful was the word. I feel like that's the perfect way to describe her writing. Like, it does definitely have a melancholy feel throughout the whole thing, but it's also just so interesting watching their character relationship, but absolutely in the end, it's ultimately hopeful and joyful, and I love that so very much. Another book that was an instant 5-star read for me was The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. I read this way before I even started a booktube channel because of how much Jess from Peace Love Books raves about this book, and I just knew I was going to love it. And from the minute I started this on audio, I really highly recommend the audios if you like a male audio narrator with a Scottish accent, because they're super fun to listen to. I was just completely hooked with this. This book is just fantastic. This is the first book in her Victorian Rebels series. This book starts out with very like a childhood sweetheart type of scenario. It's just so honestly wonderful. We have Dorian Blackwell and Farah, and they have like this really sweet and tender childhood relationship, and Dorian actually ends up saving Farah from a really terrible fate, but then Farah believes that he has been sentenced to die for that and that he has passed away. They have this little childhood, super sweet wedding in the beginning, so she claims to be his widow throughout her life. Now, many years later, when she is an adult, we have Dorian Blackwell, who is not going by Dorian Blackwell anymore. He's going by the Black Heart of Benmore, and he is a highwayman, and he is definitely a bit of a villain, a little bit of a villain, and he ends up propositioning Farah to marry him for protection because people are trying to hunt her down and kill her for a secret that she has. Marry him for protection in exchange for telling him the secret that she has that will be his key to destroying his enemies. it was just so freaking great and fantastic. And again, it did have a dark beginning, like a lot of Kerrigan's books do, but it was just, I love how she just writes such romantic heroes, and if you really sort of like that darker vibe, like, definitely check this series out. It was super great. So this was another one that I just completely loved this year. And the next book that I have that was one of my favorite reads of the year is The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley. I know this is extremely popular on BookTube and Bookstagram, and for good reason, because it is freaking fantastic. I read this during the August Historical Romance Readathon and just fell completely in love with it. It was an instant 5-star read for me, and I just completely adored it. This book follows Lord Ian Mackenzie, who has been believed to be mad, and that he was kept in like an insane asylum for a lot of his childhood and teenage years. It actually ends up, it's never said on page, but it's sort of like when you read the clues, it does appear that he is on the spectrum in some way. So he definitely has trouble with like meeting people's eyes and some forms of touch, and he also definitely believes that he cannot love. So he ends up meeting this man in like the opening chapter who is sort of bragging about who his new bride is going to be, who is a very wealthy, very beautiful widow. And Ian knows that this man who is bragging about his soon-to-be bride is really a pretty terrible man. And pretty soon after he learns of that, he has this chance meeting with Beth, and he is so instantly taken with Beth, the woman who was engaged to this douchebag, that he cannot bear the thought of her being married to this garbage man. So he ends up intervening on their behalf, and it is the story of their romance, and it is just fantastically beautiful and delicious and just so good. Like, this is a pretty short book, and honestly, I read this pretty much start to finish. Like, it was that compelling. I just couldn't put it down. I loved the way, I just hit myself in the face. I love the way that Ian loved Beth so much, even though he was always like, he kept saying, you know, I can't love, I don't know how to love, I don't know what that is, but it was so clear to you as the reader that he did love her, and when he finally realizes that, and they, oh my gosh, it was so good. Like, just talking about this, it makes me want to reread it because I loved it so much, so much, so good. Alright, and the next book that I have to recommend is actually the book that really got me hooked on Sarah MacLean, and that is Wicked and the Wallflower. I honestly really wanted to put all 3 books in this series on this list, but I have really special sentimental feelings for this book because it was the first book where I sort of realized the power that romance novels can actually do, and just also Devil is one of my favorite heroes ever. I just love that man, and I loved the way that he loved Felicity in this. I just love it so much. So this book is the first in her Bare Knuckle Bastards trilogy. This follows Felicity Faircloth, who is a bit of a spinster, and she is really sort of in this situation where she has to marry, and one day she is in her bedroom, and lo and behold, there is Devil, who just happened to be in her bedroom, and he propositions her to help her land the hand of the Duke and become his wife. But Felicity is really reluctant to accept that deal because she wants to have a life of passion. She doesn't want to just have an arranged marriage or a marriage of convenience. She wants that passion that she knows is out there, and she wants to experience that. So she makes this deal that, okay, yeah, I will marry him if you can make him really want me. And of course, Devil and Felicity fall in love, and it was just, honestly, it was just such a beautiful story, and it was just so powerful too. I just loved it so much. It was great. Okay, and the next book I have that was one of my favorite reads of the year is Tycoon by Joanna Shoup. This is actually a novella. This is the prequel novella to her Knickerbocker series, and honestly, it was fantastic. It's a really quick read. It only took me like an hour and a half to read it start to finish, and I feel like it does a great job of getting you really invested in this Gilded Age New York type of historical romance world. I loved it so much. So this book follows Ted Harper, who is at Grand Central Station getting ready to get on the train when he's sort of like really accosted by this young woman, Clara, who just sort of runs up and begs him to pretend that they are a couple because she's being chased by some men who know that she witnessed a crime being made, so she's in like a lot of danger. So Ted instantly feels like she is only after him for his money because he is an extremely wealthy man. as it's called, Tycoon, like all of the Knickerbocker Club books, they all have like the hero is extremely wealthy, really sort of like a, most of them are self-made heroes that way, and I really loved that too. But he is sure that Clara is only there after his money, and he doesn't really believe her that she really needs his help to kind of convince these people following her that she didn't do anything and to get away. I really loved the fast pace of this book. It's set entirely on a train pretty much, and I also felt like it was pretty believable. It was honestly really believable for me that they met, had this instant connection, and then had this sort of emotional attachment too, and it all happens just within a couple of days. But it was just really enjoyable. I thought it was a really standout historical novella, and I loved it very much. This was the first book I had read by Joanna Shupe, and I was instantly like, wow, I need to read more of her. Okay, so those are the 5-star reads. Those are the remaining 5-star historical romance reads that I had. So now we're going to be talking about some of my 4- and 3-star reads. These were still standouts for me and books that I still would recommend, depending on if you like a certain trope. And they were also so unique that I wanted to include them because I really, really liked them. So the first book that I want to talk about is Along Came a Duke by Elizabeth Boyle. This book was a really pleasant surprise for me. It was super fun. It was very engaging. It was very witty. It had a lot of banter. It had a really swoony, roguish hero. And I just really, really loved it. So this book follows Tabitha, who is living with her aunt and uncle. She is an orphan, and she's really, honestly, having a pretty terrible life because they're not really very nice to her, and in that way it sort of has Cinderella-ish vibes. And she suddenly becomes an inheritor of a very large fortune, but she only gets that fortune if she marries a certain man. And as soon as she meets this certain man, she knows that she will never be happy living with him for the rest of her life. He's not exactly despicable, but he's certainly only there for the money because he knows about the arrangement. And she just really doesn't want to marry him, but she also doesn't want to stay at home with her aunt and uncle, who are pretty terrible, and she has zero freedom and zero independence. So she's really torn about what to do. And then enter the Duke of Preston, who has another chance meeting with Tabitha and is very much a rogue and a rake, and he is completely taken with her personality, especially with her mind and how witty she is and how she really sort of just fires back at him. They had a lot of great sexual tension between them. And so he then tries to persuade her to not marry this guy because he's this guy who she's supposed to marry for the fortune, because he cannot bear to think of her with him. But the Duke of Preston doesn't know why she has to marry him, and Tabitha doesn't really want to tell him because she's afraid that he will intervene and she doesn't want him to pity marry her. So this book was just so fun, watching the two of them come together and watching this. I just love a reformed rake story, and that is exactly what happened here, watching him completely fall for her. It was super delightful, a very fun read. I loved it. The next book I have to recommend is Her Night with the Duke by Diana Quincy. I really enjoyed this book. This book was very unique and very fun, and also I feel like it was very fast-paced. It also has a really strong female character, which I dearly love. So this book follows Leela, who is a widow, and she finds herself at an inn where she wants to spend the night. But of course there are no rooms left, and so there are a lot of men in the inn who are trying to lewdly get her to come and stay with them, when the Duke of Huntingdon, Elliot, decides to intervene and try and save her and offer that she can stay with him in his room because he's an honorable man and all this other stuff. So they end up staying in the same room together, and they have one night of passion, and then they leave apart the next day, planning to never see each other again. At least Leela is. Elliot is completely smitten with her and wants to see her again as soon as possible. So then the story picks up when Leela returns home, and she is going to meet her stepdaughter. Leela's husband, who passed away, was quite a bit older than her, so she has a stepdaughter who is a little closer to her in age. She comes home to meet her stepdaughter, who is very excited because the man she is supposed to marry is going to be there pretty soon for them all to meet. And who do you suppose that man is but Elliot, the Duke? So this book was honestly just super, super fun. It had a really great forbidden element to it, and I loved that it was had a little bit of diversity. I really loved seeing the independence that Leela had. She's a really wonderfully strong, empowering female character, and it was just a ton of fun. I liked it a lot. And the next book that I really, really enjoyed this year is actually a It's a winter novella. It's the Captain's Midwinter Bride. Now, it does have like one mention of Christmas. I read this as part of my Christmas romance reading vlog, but it really didn't feel super Christmassy. I feel like you could read this at any time of year, and especially right now when it's winter, it would be perfect time to read it. So this book is a very short novella, and it is about Captain Philip, who is a sea captain who has been at sea for most of his married life. He's been married to Annalise for, I think, 20 years, it says, so this is also like a second chance romance, which I really like second chance romances personally. I think they're super fun and very sweet, and that is exactly what this one was. Now, Captain Philip and Annalise, they had like almost kind of like a marriage of convenience. I don't know if it was a marriage of convenience. They married, I guess it was a marriage of convenience, and then Philip left right away to go to sea to serve the Queen's Navy, and Annalise was left at home to raise the children, and she saw him very, very rarely. Now he has returned home, and he's not going to be on the sea really anymore, and their oldest daughter is about to get married. So the whole book is set around them trying to figure out if the man that their daughter wants to marry is actually a good match for her and if he actually loves her, while at the same time they're trying to sort of fall back in love or fall in love originally. And it just was honestly such a sweet and soft romance between the two of these people who were very much ready and willing to have a second chance at their marriage, to have the love story that they wanted, that they kind of feel like they missed out on, and I loved it so much. It was great. Okay, and the next book that I have to recommend is My Fake Rake by Eva Leigh. Ava Leigh. This book is so cute, honestly. If I could describe this book, I would say that it's just very, very cute. I feel like this would be a really good book for people who are new to historical romance too. I think it's super fun. It has a very modern feel in the way that it's written, and it has a really fun concept of sort of like a male makeover. He's the Wallflower becoming a rake type of character, which I thought was super fun. And also, this was the book we had for our December book for the Rake Appreciation Society, and we had Ava Leigh on the show, and it was super fun getting to talk to her about her writing and her career. This book was just really, really cute and really, really fun. It follows Grace, who is she's also another intellectual woman who is really priding herself on like how much she learns, and she's really interested in science, and I believe it's the study of bugs. I think it's bugs. I can't remember. She's really interested in science and the natural world. And she has like a friend who is also really interested in science, and that is Sebastian, who is the fake rake. So Grace really has come to the point in her life where her dad he's dying, and his dying wish is that she marry happily. And there is a very well-renowned scientist who comes to town and to work with Grace and Sebastian, and Grace has a little bit of a crush on him, and she is just positive he is going to be the perfect man for her, but he really isn't showing any interest in her at all. So they hatch a plot that Sebastian will become this rake. He will get this makeover and be this really desirable and attractive man who is showing an interest in Grace, and then, of course, this other man will suddenly see her value and want her for himself. And as is always the case, they end up having feelings for each other, and it complicates things, and it was just honestly really very cute. It was a lot of fun, and I really, really think that if you want that type of raked or Wallflower to rake male makeover type of feel with some very intellectual characters, I think you would love this. Okay, the next book that I want to recommend is The Virgin Who Ruined Lord Grey. This is by Anna Bradley. This book was a very unique historical romance, and it really had a strong mystery vibe to it too, so if you like mystery subplots, you might really enjoy this too. This book follows Lord Grey, who is a Bow Street runner who has never ever missed catching a man until Sophia comes along. Sophia is a very independent woman. She lives in this house of other children and young adults who are sort of under the care of this woman, and they're really trying to make society a better, more safe place by taking it into their own hands. And Sophia is on the hunt one night to try and figure out who actually committed the murder that one of her friends and fellow, I guess, person who lives at the home that she did was accused for. So her friend was accused of murder, and she is convinced that he did not commit this murder, and she's taking it upon herself to try and figure out who actually did. So her and Tristan, Lord Grey, have this meeting one night. He is completely taken with her and very, very intrigued with her and attracted to her. And they have a bunch of run-ins. It's a little bit of a slow burn with their relationship, with, again, the emphasis being more on the mystery. But it was just honestly really very unique and very compelling, and I really loved these characters, and the romance that we got was very fun. I liked it a lot. Okay, another book that I would love to recommend is The Rogue of Fifth Avenue by Joanna Shupe. This is the first book in her Uptown Girl series. This is another historical romance set in Gilded Age New York, so it's late 1800s New York, and this follows Frank, who is a lawyer, and Mamie, who is the daughter of a very wealthy client of Frank's. Their first meeting is very fun. They have a lot of sexual tension between each other and a lot of attraction, and they end up sort of thrown together when Frank is trying to get Mamie out of this gambling hell where she is not supposed to be because her dad would kill her. And Mamie ends up sort of pleading for Frank to help her to solve this case for this woman who is being accused of murdering her husband, but it was really a domestic abuse type of situation. And I really loved how much Frank loved her, honestly. I was very impressed with how much he really pined for her and wanted her, but I also really enjoyed, especially in this one, the subplot of the mystery and the legal case. I felt like that was super interesting too. This one is extremely steamy. It is very fun. I enjoyed this a lot. The next book I want to recommend is The Luckiest Lady in London by Sherry Thomas. This book was a very fun surprise for me as well. I was very, very, very interested in the characters in this book. This book follows Lord Felix, who is he's the Marquess of Wentworth, and he is really sort of the man that everybody wants to catch that season. But he has a dark past and a lot of things that he's really struggling with, and he really seeks out like public adulation, and that's the thing that really helps him to feel better. He sets his eye on Louisa Cantwell, who really needs to marry to help support her family. She has a sister with epilepsy, and she's very worried that she's like the only hope to get their family to be able to support her. So at the end of the season, when Lord Wentworth proposes to her, she accepts, even though he is really not the man that she wants to marry. And this is really one of those historical romances that starts with they get married early, and she doesn't really like him, but then she sort of falls for him very quickly, and we get to see the dark secrets that he's had sort of be unraveled and watch him work through his feelings to have this really tender love for her. And it was just honestly very, very interesting and very fun. And I feel like something Sherry Thomas does really well is she has this really good balance between like banter and levity, but also really some dark, serious moments too. It was super fun. It was really good. I can't wait to read more by Sherry Thomas. The next book that I have to recommend is An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. I really enjoyed this. I read this for the Ravished by Romance book club that Jess and Lacey do, and it was very, very enjoyable to read. This book follows Elle, who is a former slave, and she is trying to... She's like underground. She's posing as a slave to try and get secrets to take back to the Union, and she meets Malcolm, who is a detective for the Pinkerton service at that time, so he is posing as a Confederate soldier who is also trying to get secrets to take back to the Union cause. But neither of them know that they are both posing as that. They both sort of she believes that he's this Confederate soldier and is this terrible person, and he doesn't really know that she is like a secret agent too, but he's just so completely struck with her beauty and who she is, and it was really, honestly, just fantastic watching these two fall in love. I really enjoyed this. It was super fun. If you're interested in like Civil War type of historical romances, I would highly recommend this. It was really great. And the last book that I want to recommend is Edenbrook by Julianne Donaldson. This book is definitely a PG romance. It's very clean, but it was still just so completely lovely and soft and beautiful, and I really, really loved it. This book follows Marianne, who is really trying to escape the boredom of Bath and the advances of an unwanted suitor who she really doesn't want to marry. She receives an invitation from her sister Cecily to come to this country estate, and she just absolutely rushes to avoid this suitor. On the way there, she's accosted by a highwayman, and then a another man comes to her rescue. There's a lot of chemistry and a lot of sparks between them, and there's a little bit of intrigue about who this person is. And I would say that watching the couple in this book fall in love was honestly like watching Pride and Prejudice 2.0. It was a more flirtatious, more romantic version of Pride and Prejudice, and I loved this book so much. It was so enjoyable to read. And if you are looking for a clean romance, if you are looking for something with zero steam, I would highly recommend this. It was honestly really well done. I loved it a whole lot. Alright, those are the 20 historical romances that I read this year that I would recommend to you. Some of my top 20 historical romances. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next one.